Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Michelle DiMarzo. I'm the Curator of Education and Academic Engagement at the Fairfield University Art Museum. We are so pleased to welcome you to what we can call the culminating event celebrating our two fabulous spring exhibitions, Adger Cowans' Sense and Sensibility in the museum's Bellarmine Hall galleries, and 13 Ways of Looking at Landscape, Larry Silver's Connecticut photographs here in the Walsh Gallery. Both shows run through June 18th, so you have plenty of time to see them again and again if you so choose. And I know that all four of our guests tonight are very familiar faces to most of you who have attended some of our other events for both shows. If you've missed any of them, I'll just remind you, you can find them on our YouTube channel and on the individual websites for each of the two exhibitions. But I hope our four speakers will forgive me if I keep introductions almost criminally short so that we can dive into the conversation. So we hope you'll join us as well, either at the audience mics or on the quick live chat for those of you who are watching at home. So first, let me introduce our artists. Adger Cowans, you can wave, Adger, or wave your hat so make sure everyone knows who you are. Adger Cowans, a native of Ohio, a celebrated photographer whose wide-ranging work includes the civil rights movement, jazz musicians, landscape, and artistic studies of the human form, water, and light. He's also one of the founding members of Kamoinge, a Black photographers collective whose mission is to honor, document, preserve, and represent the history and culture of the African diaspora with integrity and respect for the humanity through the lens of Black photographers. Sitting next to him is photographer Larry Silver. Larry, would you give us a wave? They didn't know they were going to have to do the wave when they showed up on screen. Photographer Larry Silver grew up in New York City, where he drew inspiration from members of the prestigious Photo League, but he has called Westport, Connecticut his home since 1973. Among his best-known work is the acclaimed series Muscle Beach, focused on beachgoers, gymnasts, and bodybuilders at the Santa Monica Beach in California. He has maintained a successful career in commercial photography as well as his personal darkroom, as he feels that creating a print is just as important as taking the picture. And now I'm pleased to introduce our two curators who are flanking their photographers on either end of the stage. So I will start with Halima Taha. Halima, would you give us a wave? Halima curated Adger's show. She is a curator, appraiser, art advisor, educator, and speaker. She is perhaps best known for her groundbreaking bestseller, Collecting African American Art Works on Paper and Canvas, the first book to validate collecting fine art, printmaking, and photography by Americans of African descent as viable assets and commodities within the marketplace. And last but absolutely not least is Leslie K. Brown. Leslie, if you would give us a wave. Dr. Brown is an independent curator, scholar, and educator who specializes in the history of photography and modern and contemporary art. She holds a PhD in the history of art and architecture from Boston University and has taught courses at colleges and universities across New England. Please join me in welcoming all four of our distinguished guests.
Thank you, Michelle. My name is Leslie Brown, and I will give a little bit of an overview of how the conversation will go. We'd like to keep it organic and flowing. Halima and I have sort of put together some topics and themes that we both have handy, as well as some questions in mind. But we also hope that as the conversation flows, if we go different places, we'll just go there as well. One thing I did want to mention is I put together this PowerPoint that has both Adger's and Larry's work paired up, and Halima and I worked together on some of these wonderful pairings. I hope you'll see that there are a lot of wonderful synergies between their work, but there's also differences, and I'm happy to also pause or go back to an individual photograph if you'd like to talk about it. As well as if anybody in the audience would like to talk about it as well. So, and I'm going to be the human loop for doing this. So I thought we'd just start out beginning at the beginning, actually. And one of the things that both Halima and I were struck by is really that your careers and lives really span a tremendous amount in the history of the medium of photography. And you witnessed and were a part of tremendous change, both in the academic world, the museum world, commercial, galleries, et cetera. And also when you were both starting out, photography as a career wasn't that common. And certainly you both sort of said, this is what I want to do with my life, and I'm sure you have a lot of great stories. But just so we can have the whole audience who might not be as familiar with everybody's work, let's start out by talking about where you started. And Adger, you mentioned how there were several amateur photographers in your family and how your mother also collected photo books. And Larry, you've spoken about how your uncle photographed weddings and bar mitzvahs and your mom buying you a $5 Brownie camera as a teenager. And I was just wondering, to kick it off, if you both could speak to some of the germinal interests that you had and how you went about pursuing photography from the very early age. I don't know who wants.
You addressing me first?
Sure, go ahead, Larry.
You're inaccurate when you said
sorry.
that I had an uncle who...
Okay.
Nobody in my family
Okay.
was in the arts or was a photographer.
I saw
I did
that
have
in
an
it.
uncle
Okay.
who thought he knew a lot about photography
okay.
and criticized me. But
There you go.
I don't think he ever took a picture in his life. But I started out, and I was about 12 years old. I was kind of a kid that, you guys don't mind, I have a little bit of a New York accent. So if you don't understand me, try harder. I was one of these kids that liked stamps, and I liked, all kinds of hobbies. And photography sort of drifted my way. The thought of developing and printing was what really interested me. So I went ahead with a kid from the same building, and we bought a developing outfit for $7.50. It consisted of the tanks and chemicals and so on. And he eventually gave up on it. I bought him out for $3, I think it was. And I kept going into it. And but in order to develop film, you had to shoot pictures. So I went out with I had a Brownie camera, and I took pictures. So I was about 12 when I started. And eventually, there's nobody as I mentioned, nobody in my family was ever in the arts. And I don't know how I went in that direction. It just seemed to be a natural evolution. Then I went to a high school of industrial art, which taught photography. It was the only, at that point, it was the only school in the country that taught photography, and I grew in terms of my knowledge and my abilities and so on.
Great. Well, I do apologize. I found that as an interview that you did online, so maybe I'm sorry if I was incorrect.
That's okay.
Adger, I think you also started out at this very young age as well.
Yeah, my mother was an amateur photographer. I had an uncle who was an amateur photographer. And when we would get together, the family on holidays, everybody would take pictures. So they would say, hey, take a picture, boy. Take a picture of your uncles. I didn't have any idea about being an artist or anything at that time. I was just taking pictures because they told me, take pictures of your uncle, that family. So I did that, and but I was a musician. I studied music from a very early age, and I thought that was what I was going to do, and I was very good at it. And when I graduated from high school, I had the possibility of getting a scholarship, a full scholarship in music, but they told me I had to go back and brush up on my math and English before they would give me the scholarship. Well, I didn't want to go back to high school. I didn't want to go back. So I'm sitting around the house, and my mother said, you're not going to sit around this house and do nothing. You're going to do something. I said, but I don't know. She said, you have a good opportunity. And in those days, you have a good opportunity for a colored boy to go to a great university. I said, so I went back and I talked to my teacher. And my English teacher, Miss Fry, and she said, Adger, this is a great opportunity. But I still didn't want to do it, so I'm sitting around the house, and my sister's boyfriend had a magazine, one of the few magazines about photography, and in it, it said, Ohio University gives degree in photography. So I told my mom, I said, that's what I'm going to do. You know? She said, well, I don't know, we have to ask your father. So my father came home, and I told him what I wanted to do, and he said, that's ridiculous. What are you talking about? It's a hobby. Photography is a hobby. You better get something in your head and put that camera in. But anyway, my mother, being a sweetheart and a person, she just, oh, honey, that's what he wants to do. And so he acquiesced, so okay. So I studied photography at Ohio University in 1954. And I got out in 1958. I didn't actually get my degree in 58 because I quit, because there was a lot of things going on. We were sitting in, there was a lot of racism in the school there, and so anyway, I quit. But I went back 1991, they gave me my degree. But I did it because I wasn't doing anything, you know, I wasn't doing the music, so first year of college, I do like all the other students, you know, party. Second year, party. Third year, party. About halfway through, you know, I had this picture of 4 kids with balloons. And I realized as I was showing it to people that they talked about the smiles on their faces and not about these poor kids. And I realized that there was something there. Photographs allowed me to get into people's heads. They would talk about the photograph, but they would reveal who they were. And I thought that's what really got me turned on to really being serious about it.
Mm-hmm. I mean, one thing that Larry texted me, actually, he found a spread that he had, and it was American Photo.
It was American Photography in 1952. I was going to High School of Industrial Art, and I was doing a lot of, as I mentioned, they had a photography course. And so I was out shooting a lot as a kid and put together a portfolio. I turned my bedroom into a dark room and made prints in my bedroom and used the tub there to wash my prints and so on. But I put together a portfolio, and I brought it up to American Photography. It was a magazine, and I was about 17, and they did a 6-page spread on young photographer. I started that whole thing. They did a whole thing on young photography. But that portfolio, they mentioned that I came up with giant prints. Now, the print size, the biggest I made was 16 by 20. In today's standards, a 16 by 20 is a small print. But right. In 1952, making a print 16 by 20 was a large, he called it a giant print. And then I submitted my portfolio to Scholastic Art Awards, and they awarded me a scholarship to the Art Center School in Los Angeles, California. And so I ended up going to California on a scholarship, and it was a weird situation because I grew up in an apartment house with 5 floors, and then they put me into this fancy house in Orange Drive in Los Angeles, and it was a cultural change. I mean, I was so impressed because even the furniture all looked the same. They matched, you know, and that to me was like really unusual. And I was allowed to sit on the couch. So I ended up in California, and then somebody told me about this beach that was nearby. It was called Muscle Beach. And so I had just developed the ability to shoot with a 4x5 view camera, and I had a 4x5 view camera. That's those big cameras that you put you put a cloth over your head and you focus. So I went to Muscle Beach and I photographed it, not realizing that 50, 60 years later, it would become a icon in California. The Los Angeles Museum of Art did a whole spread on it. International Center did a spread on it. And the pictures from Muscle Beach are like all over. And I was about 18 when I took the pictures.
It's amazing.
Yeah. You don't realize it. And of course, today, Muscle Beach is a problem in California with homeless and so on.
Halima?
Well, I wanted to ask both of you, what aspect of the photographic medium made you feel compelled to make photographs? There are many pieces to making a photograph, you know, from seeing and your relationship with eye-hand coordination to printing. I mean, what aspect of the process just hit you where this is what you felt compelled to do?
Working in the dark room, making a print, taking a picture, and going in the dark room and watching it come up in the developer. That was the most exciting thing for me, to see something you shot here and in dark room and you have a beautiful print. That was the most exciting to me at the time.
Larry?
I sort of agree with him on that. There's something about being in a dark room and working on a print. It's hands-on. You know, it's not like sitting at a computer and you're pushing buttons. You're in there and you're working with chemistry. You're concentrating on what you want in that print. And you're all by yourself. You're into that, and you before you realize it, hours and hours have gone by, and that's really the darkroom. I think it also seduces a lot of photographers. That's because it's, as Adger says, it's sort of magical watching a print come out of the developer. You know.
I know it was for me. I mean, even as on the other side, art historian, photo historian, my father, I would go in and I would draw on the floor of the darkroom, and I said, Dad, could I help with a hippo? That's what I called it.
Hypo.
I know, but that's what I was like, this big. I mean, there's something really, you lose yourself in your head, and you go into this wonderful mental space. Did you want to expand upon that?
Oh, sure. The reason why I was asking about that is because, you know, photographers, compared to other visual artists working in other mediums, spend a lot more time in a solitary practice. I mean, other artists work in their studios, but there's a different kind of exchange in the process of talking about the work or making the work and studio visits and things of that nature. But you know, there's solitary time in the darkroom, and there's also the time when you're out in the field, so to speak. And I just wanted to ask you both to talk about if it's a meditation, but your relationship with yourself in relation to the world behind the lens.
I think art is sort of a selfish thing. I mean, you don't think of the world when you're making pictures. You think of that, it's self-gratifying. You're out to please yourself. And I think all forms of art, you've got to first please yourself before you can please anyone else. So I make pictures because it's something about it that is gratifying to me. And it really doesn't matter whether or not anybody likes it, as long as it's something that you like, you know.
I would have to agree with that. It's a very selfish kind of thing. You're involved with, it's almost like a fly on the wall. You're looking for those moments that make you feel something. If you feel it, you hope that when somebody else sees it, they feel it too. And it's that human emotion, that transfer of that human emotion that I'm after to connect with in anything that I do, whether it's the street, movies, whatever. But I think that is the thing that connects and makes it more this selfish thing becomes something that you can share with everybody. You work alone. Most artists work alone. But when it's out there and other people get involved in it, then there's something about that that takes you out of yourself, and you realize that you have struck a chord, you know, but it is a very self and a very meditative kind of thing to, you know, you're hiding behind the camera, basically.
I never think of other people when I'm photographing. I'm thinking, and I design a lot of my work. I choose an angle, a lens, a direction, which turns my pictures most of my pictures are very graphic oriented. And so I'm concentrating on designing this in the frame, in the cameras, because I never crop in the darkroom. I do all my cropping in the viewfinder. So most of my pictures, when you see it, that's exactly what I saw, what I wanted. It didn't come later.
Thank you.
And
that's a pet peeve of mine with photographers. A lot of younger photographers, they shoot with the idea of cropping, and to me,
Yeah.
that's an issue.
And when I shoot, if I press this exposure button and I have a image on the film, I've got to print it, because if it was attractive to me, if it was what I liked when I photographed it, I want to print it. So I don't take a lot of pictures. And when I'm on a shooting and I see something I like, I spend some time, if you have the ability to spend the time, if it's something that's not moving or inanimate, and I'll design the whole thing and down to the very lens, the very focal length of the lens that I want to use, and the angle, and then I'll make the exposure. So.
One thing, maybe we can drill down on this a little bit more and maybe even flip it. You both talked about how it's sort of selfish, but it's shareable. It's a shareable experience, a shareable visual offer to the audience. But one of the things, too, is that you both have spoken quite eloquently early on. You benefited a lot from mentorship. So in terms of maybe thinking about, maybe you could talk a little bit about how others gave to you, and if there's anybody else that you mentored as well.
Adger, you want to take that? Or?
Yeah, well, I think early on, the person that most impressed me was the prints of Edward Weston's. I thought that they looked 3D. They were just beautiful, his prints, and I wanted to make prints like that, and that inspired me, you know. But in shooting, I don't think about anything except what's in front of me, too. But the idea of somebody sharing it, that's another thing. But I think all photographers, when they shoot something that they feel about, you know. And I'll use any lens. The lens doesn't matter to me. Basically, it's what I have at the time. If I have a 4x5, then I'm working with 4x5. If I'm working with 35, then it's 35. But the frame, like Larry said, that's, you know, that's where it all happens. If it's not framed right and it doesn't resonate in the frame, then, you know, you're out of luck. So in the old days, you only had 36 shots, you know. Nowadays, you got, you know, click, 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 click. Mm-hmm. But you had to really, like Larry said, compose.
Are we seeing the pictures? Are they seeing the pictures?
Yes.
Go back to the one.
Sure.
See the one with the workman under the L? How it's how graphic it is, how each line leads to a particular, to the man on the ladder. That's how I work a lot. I work where I control your eye. So I want your eye to move in that direction. And all those lines, that's a perfect example of the way I shoot, because everything goes to that one subject. Mm-hmm. And that's a good example. But getting back to my early experiences, when I was going to the high school, industrial art, and taking photography, there was a camera store nearby called Peerless Camera Stores, and all the pros used to go there. You walk in there and Gene Smith would be there, or you know, some of the top photographers, Irving Penn would go there. And so I would hang out there because it was like 5 or 6 blocks away from my school. And they had a big darkroom department there. And the guy behind the darkroom that was selling paper and film and so on, his name was Lou Bernstein. And Lou was part of the Photo League. And I started to look at Lou's pictures, and Lou sort of guided me. I was shooting like in the early parts of photography, we had what we call pictorialism, where photographers try to make pictures that sort of look like paintings. Mm-hmm. And that changed, Stieglitz changed that point of view and said, you know, you got to make photographs that have significance and meaning to it. And the Photo League was a group of people that photographed New York and sort of the underbelly of the city. And so Lou would look at my work, and my work again, it was sort of pretty, almost like a pretty kind of a picture. And when I saw Lou's, there was a depth to it. There was compassion. There was a mood to it, and so that changed my work a lot. But I still had segments of the pictorial movement in me. So a lot of my work now some of it is a cross, like the jogger. Mm-hmm. It's a cross between a pictorial way of making a pretty picture and how life exists. But the Photo League, most of the people in the Photo League would just, if they see something that they would just shoot it and record it, and very few would ever design it. They would just capture the emotion that was taking place at that moment, and that was it. Maybe a close-up, but I use all of the space around it to, to tell the story.
Could, Adger,
Well, I
could you
just want to talk about peerless camera. You know, we were in the same place at the same time many times, and I didn't even know him, and he didn't know me. I knew Lou Bernstein.
You knew Lou?
Yeah. I spent a lot of time in peerless camera. You know, there were not that many stores where you could see professional people, you know, and you could get, maybe somebody would look at your work. There weren't that many, you see. This is, and still at this time, photography wasn't considered an art. It wasn't considered an art until Ansel Adams was on the cover of Time magazine in 1979, and he sold a photograph for $1,500 called Moonrise Over Her Neck. All of a sudden, it took off, you know, and the whole idea of being a photographer changed. All of a sudden, you're considered an artist. Before photojournalism, you know, if you went to take your picture to somebody to publish, they didn't pay you that much, you know, $10.
I think actually,
but later it changed.
I think photography really changed with the exhibition of at the Museum of Modern Art, the Family of Man. I think, and that was in 1954, 55.
Yeah.
And also, Life magazine was publishing, and the photographers that they had were really great photographers, especially W. Eugene Smith, who I tremendously respect, because he was not only his pictures were very emotional, but he was a master printer, and he spent a lot of time on printing. So I think Adger's right. Photographers had no respect up until in that period of time. The museum started to collect them, but they weren't showing much photography. But there was a few museum curators that were ahead of the curve. Ann Tucker at the Houston Museum, and Steichen, of course, at the Museum of Modern Art, and these few curators were collecting it, but there wasn't any respect for it. And in fact, I think I heard a story that Ansel Adams was teaching at a university, and they had an art show with the faculty, and they didn't want to put Ansel Adams' work in because it was an art show, you know. So.
I don't think the respect began until the 1970s, and which shifted at MoMA with John Sikowski, really starting to talk about an aesthetic that was deep in its own history, not being so reliant on pictorialism, as you were saying. One of the things I just wanted to go back to, you were talking about the Photo League, and I thought that it was really important that you were talking about that as a group of people that came together and talked about photography and had their approaches. And I wanted Adger to talk about Kamoinge, which is currently it's the oldest photography organization in the country. It's 60 years old, and it's the first and the only photography collective of members who are Americans of African descent who came together. And Adger, I wanted you to talk about the group in terms of how it talked about aesthetics and the medium and how it provided support in an arena that was already diminishing the value of the medium, but also diminishing the value of photographers of African descent and just the value of this organization that is current to this day.
Oh, well, I have to start with the heliographers, because that was the first gallery that showed photography as art. Paul Caponegro, Carl Cirenza, and that whole group. You know, and I had a show in that gallery. That was the first show I had, and it wasn't about photography per se. It was about personal vision, what you felt, what you saw. It had to be very personal. And that whole idea I kind of brought into the Kamonge group. It was, for me, about making a picture that had meaning, not just photographing black people, but to make a photograph that had something in it that related to the whole world. But the reason it was important to me is because in the media at that time, black people were not favored very well. You know, there were a lot of negative images. And so we wanted to do pictures that showed the respect and the love for our people. And that's why we came together. That was the whole point. But it was based on making good photographs first.
Exactly.
You know, you couldn't just make something because it was a black person. No, you had to have a photograph that had meaning. And so we came together and critiqued each other and worked together, and we just stayed together. That was the whole point, because there was nothing else. There were no other groups that we could join or be part of. So we kind of did our own little thing there. And we're still together.
Has history as a garment for your own self-awareness shaped your approach to your subject matter and the way that you organize your photographs?
Very.
I don't know if I really understand that question.
Yeah, run that again.
So, you know, you have both lived through a few decades of history. You know, you were children, you know, under two terms of, you know, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. You're both aware of the Berlin Olympics and Jesse Owens, and you both grew up and were aware of Hitler and Mussolini and Stalin spreading fascism throughout Europe and other places. You know, were both aware of Jim Crow laws and the big band, you know, big band and swing. You know, these are very important parts of American history that you know affect today. Harry Truman, you know, integrated the forces. You know, there were, you know, I think Barry Goldwater was the first Jewish candidate for presidency, although he was a raised Episcopalian. And the Montgomery boycotts, all the way up to the civil disobedience of Rosa Parks. There's a reason why I'm framing all of this, and that you both also are aware of civil rights acts, voting rights, the whole movement. You witnessed and were aware of the assassinations of John F. Kennedy, Robert F. Kennedy.
I got the point you're making.
Okay, so,
I got the point
yeah.
you're making.
No, but this is, I think it's important to state this because we are at a university and we have a generation of students that do not have these references.
Well,
But I just want to ask the question to clarify it. So having listed this, plus Apollo coming up to the presidency of Barack Obama, Trump, the current administration, my question is, how has history, as a garment or as a backdrop for your self-awareness of the world in which you live, how has it shaped your approach, or not, to the subject matter or the way that you approach either any of your photography, whether it's figurative, abstract? How have these other things, because they affect your psyche. You're in the world, and sometimes you're of it and sometimes you're not. I just wanted to get a sense from you.
Can I answer that one?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because he's thinking about it. After it has no bearing on me.
Okay, good.
Like
People.
Adger asked a question: does motion picture have a bearing on me? Mm-hmm. No. Mm-hmm. The world situation. I don't shoot. I don't go to rallies. Mm-hmm. I don't attend protests. Mm-hmm. I wasn't part of the civil rights movement. Mm-hmm. But what I did is photograph people living their life. And most of my images are not negative images. Most of my images make people look good because people do good things. Mm-hmm. I'm not looking to change anybody's mind. I'm just recording what I see about life around me. And when I lived in New York, I photographed the same way. And the New York Historical Society considers me a New York photographer. Mm-hmm. When I went to California and shot in Muscle Beach, the LA County Museum and the Getty consider me a California photographer. Mm-hmm. I live in Connecticut, and the Connecticut considers me a Connecticut photographer. Mm-hmm. I'm not a Danny Lyons or somebody who goes to the rallies. I just assume shoot up images that are not negative. That's me.
I agree with everything you're saying, but as a black man in America, there were certain things I could not avoid being part of. I didn't go to rallies. I hated rallies. I didn't do any of that other stuff in front of the UN and all that. I did some, but I was more interested in photographing beauty, something that was spiritually uplifting for all human beings. That was my concern, because there was enough negativity out there. There's always negativity. Mm-hmm. But I wanted to show beautiful things, the same as you, beautiful people, a beautiful situation, a beautiful figure, a beautiful light on something. That was more important to me than being a recorder of history that way.
Maybe we can push on that a little bit more. I'm struck by these images that we're looking at right now, and maybe we can sort of turn to the idea of light that I think both of you share an affinity for in your work. And of course, photography is everything to do with light. I mean, it actually literally means drawing with light. And both of you also photograph lights and shadows, as well as what we're looking at right now, something in a very high-key palette. Printing something like this is very difficult in the darkroom. And I was wondering if you could speak a little bit more about why and how you photograph light.
Well, photography is light, dark and light. Mm-hmm. You can't have a photograph without light. You have to have light to make a photograph. So there's the light and the dark. You're always dealing with that. But the idea of going in the darkroom and making a print, like this print of the man in the snow there, I wanted to show the quality of the light on the snow, not just the figure, and that's a very difficult thing to print. So it's a matter of, you have to know your technique. You have to understand photography in order, I think, to make a picture. You have to understand what you're dealing with, the chemicals, the timing, the light, what lenses you're using, how sharp or not sharp, or all that is important when you get in the darkroom to get what you actually saw. Because what you actually see, and I was taught, I don't do any cropping. I think that's cheating to me. The idea is to see the image and capture that image, not say, well, I'll go in the darkroom and I'll put this is a nice little corner over here. I think that's cheating. The idea of seeing is dealing with that frame and getting in the darkroom printing. It's just a matter of technique, knowing your technique.
Well, first of all, you don't photograph light. Light is a tool that enables you to get an image. I think what you may be saying is that why is it that some of your pictures are very light and very airy? I think like the pictures that he just pointed out, the snow and the woman on the beach.
Atmosphere.
That's a matter of the photographer, he or she deciding how he or she wants that picture to look. And knowing that if it was lighter, it would work better than if it's a normal print. And darker, it becomes maybe, it's a whole, it's different. You control that. There's a period of time where people were very cognizant of a print, because that's Ansel Adams sort of started that, because his prints were so great, so beautiful. He spent so much time in the darkroom making these gorgeous prints that there was a time when people wanted this, they wanted a so-called perfect print. So everybody was printing to get a really nice print. At one point I decided, and I was one of those, and accidentally I decided that I was going to do everything opposite that you're supposed to do in the darkroom.
Of course you did.
I was going to use oxidated developers and bleaches and turn on a light at a given moment and to fog it. And I wanted to break every single rule that I wanted to get away from the perfect print. I even wrinkled the prints. I stepped on the prints. I did everything I can to destroy the print, hit it with light and so on. And I started to see that some of them looked even better than a normal print. They looked much more interesting. So I spent a lot of time in a darkroom, and I went through tons and tons of photographic paper. At that point, the paper was not as expensive as it is today. I went through thousands of sheets of paper and boxes of it, and crumbled and so on. And I said to myself, if an artist can work with found material, if an artist can paint on wood, and why can't a photographer do the same kind of thing and destroy the paper? And I found that very interesting. So some of the pictures that were in the gallery are the result of that.
I guess I was also thinking about light as not just literal, but metaphorical, what you were talking about, that you share a commonality of what you want to, what side you want to bring out of people, nature, etc., sort of the light. But you, of course, you need dark, or the absence of light. You always have sort of the converse, the yin and the yang. Maybe we can talk a little bit more about, again, sort of maybe bringing it back to the history of the medium. in terms of sort of both of you, have such amazing abilities in the darkroom, maybe we can just sort of, looking at this one now, speak a little bit more about how maybe you've used digital, or how you've sort of transitioned to that, or what you think about it, good and bad, since that you sort of have experience that runs the gamut of both.
Well, I like to experiment too. I did a lot of photograms in the early days. They were huge. They were body size. People told me I was crazy because it cost a lot of money to do photograms that big. And I wrinkled the prints and I stepped on them. I did all these things that Larry's talking about. And in those days, every photographer did a lot of experimenting because we had a book called the Photo Lab Index. And the Photo Lab Index had all kinds of formulas and all kinds of different stuff in it. That book doesn't exist anymore. But when I was in school, we learned all these different things that we could do using different chemicals and different this and different that. So I really liked experimenting a lot too. This photograph, the color photograph, is shot with a digital camera, but it's a photograph of something that I made actually. And it's reflectors off of foil. But I used different types of colors and different types of scarves, shoe, anything that had a color to reflect off of this structure that I made.
Mm-hmm.
How do you, well, you
Let me bring up a point that I became really, after like 50 some odd years in the darkroom, I sort of learned how to control things and to make a mistake something good. I always had a problem. I wanted to add a little bit of color to my black and white photograph, and every time I would paint on a photo, it would always look like I painted something on it. It didn't look natural. So I remember that if your hypo is weak and you turn the lights on, you start to get this yellow stain. And so I decided I was going to try to get that yellow stain on my picture. And it worked. I would partially put the print into the hypo and then pull it out, turn the light on, and pretty soon I was able to control this yellow stain on my black and white photograph. And the yellow wasn't like, it was like a gold. It was almost, and it worked. It wasn't something that looked like it was painted on. It looked like it was part of the picture. And I thought that was pretty remarkable. And I took what nobody wants to get. Nobody wants their pictures to be stained. I took that stain and I used it to develop color into a black and white picture.
Mm-hmm. I mean, both of you, and this is something Halima brings up in the catalog, vacillate between sort of experimentation and documentation and fine art, and you go back and forth, and you both have those strains. I joke with Larry that when I was going through all these boxes, I came across a lot of that work that you're talking about, as well as a lot of the work in the early 2000s. And I was like, Larry, you're holding back on me. They're so amazing. And I didn't know that you had done that much work in that vein, and to some of my favorite work of yours.
I spent a lot of time, but being able to control where I wanted that fog, by turning light on, making certain areas I used the hypo to fix it so it wouldn't change, and other areas I would leave without the hypo and the light would sort of fog, and then I spent a lot of time on it, on those pictures. I had to buy the paper in rolls of 50 feet of paper, and in the darkroom I would like cut it. In the dark, at a cut, so I had to get a print trimmer that went this way instead of the one that would take my arm off.
Right.
Yeah.
You probably bought DuPont paper, right?
No, it
In the
was,
rows.
I think it was Ilford, but
Ilford.
DuPont went, the Varigam and the Velour Black went
Little
out.
Black, yeah,
They went out.
They went out.
Yeah,
And
a
that
long
was
time ago.
one a great paper. I mean, Eugene Smith printed on that paper.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I talked a lot with him about that. Because
did
when I
you?
worked with Gordon at Life, I met all those guys, you know, and I said, so what do you He said, oh, they stopped making Velour Black. I said, yeah, everybody's mad, you know. But they found out that the process was poisoning the water. And that's why, and DuPont was making that paper.
Thought process is in art making, fine art making, because you're using the divergent thought process of exploring the endless possibility of an idea or a medium. So I was curious, you know, in what fine art applications maybe, you know, do you apply when you're doing this kind of abstract photography that you might be able to expound upon for other mixed media artists, or artists who are working, I should say, in multiple mediums? I mean, I know you just are in it and you're exploring and it's free-flowing.
And it's my secret.
That's the secret recipe. Well, what could you tell, you know, a student, let's say, you know, about...
Experiment.
yeah.
Experiment. Experiment with what you feel and what you see. Experiment with that. Take it to another level. Try different things. Don't just do the same thing over and over again. Experiment on your own. Like Larry's talking. Larry is, you know, crazy. People say, what are you doing, man? You're messing up the paper. You know, but he had an idea that he wanted to do this, to see. He was experimenting, you know, to see if he could make something other than what was being made at the time, the perfect print. What is the print anyway? What is a visual print anyway? You know, and he was experimenting with that. And I think that a lot of the great photographers experimented. I know Eugene Smith experimented a lot, you know, and Gordon did. I mean, I worked with Gordon, and I know he was experimenting all the time. But when he did those photographs that he painted on, I told him, it's not going to work, Gordon.
It looks like it was painted.
I said, it's going to look like it was painted. And he had the show, and he didn't listen to me. He had the show on 57th Street, and they reviewed the show, and they said, Gordon Parks is a great photographer, but he can't paint on photographs. Called another art, you know.
What I did, when it's stained, it's right into the emulsion. It's right there.
Yeah,
you know.
Yeah, that's different.
It's interesting, it sort of leads into the commercial area because, you know, both of you have your own approach and your own vision and, and your own aesthetic. But I was curious, how do you harness, both of you work commercially, how do you harness and integrate your own aesthetic as a fine art photographer when working as a commercial photographer for someone else? What is the challenge and the compromise?
I had a studio in New York that did commercial advertising photography for 40 years. Worked on all big accounts and all magazines and so on. I think being a commercial photographer is terrific training and much more difficult than being a fine art photographer. The fact is that if you're a commercial photographer, you get all kinds of assignments, and you've got to produce. Nobody's gonna send you to California to shoot something, and you come back and you say, I couldn't get the shot. So you got to produce something, and you've got restrictions. So you learn how to use a lot of different lenses. You learn how to light. You learn how you know what's going on immediately around you, everything that's being developed, and you have to come back with something. As a fine art photographer, if you go out and there's nothing there that you want, you just go home and eat dinner, you know. But you can't do that in commercial photography. There's just too much pressure on you to come back with a picture. Especially, like you say, you go to California to shoot a celebrity for a toothpaste or a cereal box or something, and that celebrity supposed to have him for 4 hours, and he gives you 15 minutes. You've got to come back in 15 minutes with that picture.
Yeah, the commercial field, I got out of it. I hated it. I didn't like it because of all the restrictions. I wanted people to like the work that I did. And so I stopped all commercial work. I mean, I did things where they would say, okay, the toothpaste has to be this big, and the teeth have to be this big, and the toothbrush has to, it was just, I couldn't deal with it. Fashion I liked. I liked fashion because it freed me up to shoot something and come back with a picture that they could use that was beautiful. And I just translated everything that I did into the feeling that I had for whatever it was. When I got involved in the movie business, it was coming back with a photograph that they could use to advertise the film. You know, they left you alone to shoot how you saw whatever it was. And if it worked, then they used it. If it didn't, you didn't work anymore. But going out on assignment, and I did a lot of assignments for magazines, as Larry says, ball breaking and crazy, and you better come back with something or you won't work anymore. So you have to consider what it is. You know, Gordon told me working at Life magazine, he had lots of assignments, and he would go out and shoot stuff that he really felt about, but they would publish what they wanted, you know, of what he shot, because Life magazine wanted to promote Life magazine. And all commercial jobs are like that. Like Larry said, if you shoot a guy, and they do, you shoot a movie star for a magazine, they say, oh, I got 5 minutes. And you go, well, wait, take me 5 minutes to set up. I don't have time. But if you can work in that field, and there are a lot of people that do, then you can make, you know, pretty good living, but it'll drive you crazy. I mean, I can remember being in Europe and traveling around and working for a magazine and sending the pictures back. And I was traveling all over around Europe, and I woke up one morning and I said, where am I? I didn't know where I was. I had been traveling all these different little countries and staying in hotels and motels. It all got away from me. I didn't know what city I was in or what country, because one day you're here, the next day you're that, 2 weeks you're over there, back, and you're sending all this film back. So I woke up one morning and I asked the lady who's coming to clean up, I said, where am I? She said, you're in Holland. I thought I was in Paris. But that kind of work that Larry was talking about, you got to come up with it, and it'll drive you, you tear your hair out.
I did a lot of studio work, working in the studio, and I also shooting on location for major clients, for magazines, and the way I would handle an assignment, you get the job, and then you got to go on location, and you pack up everything that you think you're going to need for that job,
Right.
plus double it. So you know what camera you're going to use, but you have a backup camera and maybe even other backup. Everything's got to be backed up. And so I learned to work that way. And so when I'm doing my own work, my own personal work, that's exactly how I work. I don't walk around with a camera on me. I wake up that morning and I'll say, I'm going to go out and shoot. And I'll pack up my stuff and I'll spend that day shooting. But there are people that walk around with the cameras on, and sometimes it's a good idea because you see a shot, something that you want. But, everybody has their own way of working.
Maybe we should switch back to fine art and think about maybe some other mediums or other arts that might have inspiration that inspired you or figure in your work, such as music, poetry. That's something that figures prominently in the exhibition that I curated because I really see a lyricism in your work, Larry, for example. And the exhibition title that I chose is a nod to Wallace Stevens, who called Connecticut his home for close to 40 years. And it's sort of clustered in visual equivalents of stanzas. And for example, it calls to mind a really famous quote by Robert Frank when he famously stated, actually, I looked this up, he was a teenager too when he was featured as a young, it was from, I think it was in Life, a series of young photographers. He said, quote, "When people look at my pictures, I want them to feel the way they do when they want to read a line of a poem twice," unquote. And I just think that is such a wonderful quote to speak about both of your work. And I was wondering if you could speak about, maybe it's Larry and I also talked about he's interested, he's drawn to philosopher Francis Bacon and some of his sort of meditations on friendship and solitude. And if you could just sort of, maybe we think about some of the other disciplines that might be inspiring or figure in your work.
Well, I liked Robert a lot. I knew him very well. He lived down the street from me when I lived downtown. And when he was first doing that book on the Americans, he showed it to me. He said, "What do you think?" I said, "It's great, man. It's great." He said, "They won't publish it." He had a hard time.
Yeah.
Really?
For many years, they didn't want to publish
It was
the book.
published in France first.
He went to go to France. But that's what it was like for most of us back then. They would look at your work and they might like it, but whether they would publish it or not. But I think the influence of movies, music, I'm a jazzophile, I love jazz music, and I play it all the time, and I love poetry. I love all of it because I think it all relates to images. I just make the photographic image, but I think everybody's making some kind of image, whether it's dancing or whatever it is. Everybody's making some kind of image, you see. And that image is something, if it's on the money, it lives with you forever, It lives beyond your time. And that's what I think people should strive for. But I think those kinds of images come about through spirit. I don't see myself as a, I don't know, it's hard to say. Images happen through me, they come through me. They're not, I don't make the image makes me. Spirit says something to me, and I take the picture because I feel it. I press the button when I feel that thing. And that's what it's about for me. I don't care if I'm setting up in the studio, it doesn't matter. There's that point where you see the image and you like it or you feel it or you whatever, and you press the button, or you just whatever you do. But I think all artists to me are translators. We translate what comes from spirit.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I must be a pretty boring guy.
You're not.
I don't. I enjoy music, but I don't see how it affects my work. As far as reading is concerned, I probably look at more pictures than I read books. I'm very picture oriented.
Mm-hmm.
So, and if I pick up a magazine or something, I'm looking at pictures. So I don't see, my photography is all in my head. I see pictures all the time. When I'm walking or down the street or in a restaurant or any place, I'm seeing pictures.
All the time.
Yeah, they flash through my mind. And I don't see any influences by anything other than my visual, my eye, and putting it together in my head. When I when I see a movie, even like I mentioned, it doesn't affect me any, but I'm looking at the movie and I'm watching what thinking of what lens he's using, thinking about what angle he's using, why they shot it from that point and not from another point. That goes, I think it's been 70 years of having it drilled into my head.
Right. I mean, I think we're all a product of sort of our times as well as in all these things, sort of ideas in the ether, or the spirit, or all of these things go into me as well. I mean, Halima and I are also a product of our times. The way we approach our practice is affected by our experiences. I mean, one thing that I see in your work, for example, and we did have a really great discussion over your dining room table about those Bacon quotes that are really evocative and wonderful. I see music in your photographs. I actually see, it's sort of like if I were putting it in a key, it would be a minor key. Mm. There's just this, and I'm looking at this one, for example, it's harmonious, but it's a little discordant, but it's harmonious in that discord, and also it's in very hushed tones often. And I don't know if it's synesthesia or what, but I do sort of see, or hear things that I see in your work.
Yeah. Maybe subconsciously, there's maybe in my mind, it's, music and art, they're all intertwined.
Right.
So, but when I'm shooting, it's really design and subject matter, and design and subject matter, and the way I put those two elements together.
Mm-hmm. I mean, often music
but who is the I? Who is the I?
Who's the I?
That is making that happen? That's what I'm talking about. Who is the I that's making you think this? Who is the I that makes you see the pictures? Who is the I that is organizing? It's not you. It's what's coming through you.
Yeah.
Is what I'm saying. You're thinking these things. Well, who makes you think?
It's like what it's true. It's like what's behind it. I think that when we think about how the literary, performing, and the visual arts artists, I should say, interact with one another, that they inspire and influence, and through that interaction on a very conscious and subconscious level. But I think that all of those disciplines, within their aesthetic, address time, place, narrative, humanity, movement, and and you're not separate from what you're seeing, and you may feel that way, but I think that I know that with Adger, in terms of a real conscious connection to a seen and unseen reality, to an awareness of what's the motivation behind him, and being connected to the world in which he lives. There's a wonderful quote that I think sums up a lot of the way I understand Adger to approach his work, and it's the symbol is not the thing symbolized. The map is not the territory. The word is not the thing. S.I. Hayakawa stated that. And I think that in working with Adger and looking at a body of his work, he understands the technique and the science, but in his work, he's allowed himself to allow his emotion and feeling about the person or the subject or the situation to be a part of that process. So, he may, it's in that other picture, if you go back, when you showed the under the train, the L train, and Adger, also you're dealing with a graphic design, and you're dealing with light and repetition of form in terms, not that.
I didn't want to go too fast.
Okay. repetition of, here it is, repetition of form. You know, you both have, you know, different repeated forms in it. You're dealing, you know, photography is articulating light on a surface. You've identified that surface, and you have mapped out and planned your image. But with Adger's piece, I mean, here's a moment. He's doing the same thing, but there's a different kind of mood or feeling that comes from an organic place as well as an intellectual place as a part of the practice. So it is what you see it is, and it's not at the same time because of the way he's working. Mm-hmm. So I think what's interesting to me about both of you is that you both have very different approaches to how you work, and at the same time you share a vocabulary within the medium, and you share a period of time in which you've evolved and developed. You know, so many things have shifted probably in terms of how you approach your darkroom practice. Things must shift in terms of how you work and move within different spaces, or what is of interest to you, which is natural. But I just thought it was important, though, to emphasize and to highlight a little bit about how the world in which you live in does influence you consciously and subconsciously, and that there is an interdisciplinary experience. You know, I know how much timing and tone in music is a big part of music, but but within the photography, there's also tone, and how you can show that. Can you move the image to the boardwalk with the dog and the beach? And you know, I mean, this is a to me, this image is, and it was great to put these two together, because, you know, in this, in terms of them both being solitary kinds of images, mm-hmm. if you look at the tone of the boardwalk, and you look at them and knowing how much Adger listens to jazz, you know, it's like the tones of it are like the tones, metaphorically, the tones of piano keys, all right? I mean, if you really look at the image, okay, the composition is strong, but when you look at the prints, the same with Larry's work. It's a whole different image, but there's a lot of other stuff in there in terms of texture in there, and time and place. These are all aesthetic considerations for all the different disciplines.
Well, I think Larry and I are very much the same. He works at it a different way, but when he says he sees pictures, I see pictures all the time too. My dreams, everything. Mm-hmm. I live in pictures all the time. And he just comes at it from more personal, because he feels it within himself. But I feel it within, but I also feel it without. Mm. I'm always thinking about what the out, the spirit. What is this thing that's moving me? Mm. You know.
Do you have the window picture?
The window.
This is our last series that I did. Most of the work you see. Go back one.
Yeah, there we go.
I did a series on this window in the Westport Beach, and I love the way, in this particular one, they're all different. It's like the figures in the picture are like mashed together, almost like with a long lens, where it seems like it's almost like it's pasted and flat. And their body position. And I like that one. Is there another one of your windows? Do we have that?
No, just this
That's
one.
it, okay.
I mean, one thing that comes to mind looking at both of these is, again, the sort of improvisation, but also, I mean, it's interesting that you're saying that, because you, with this series, you just sort of stayed in one place and let everybody sort of pass by this aperture, another aperture.
Yeah, I spent a lot of time there, because, you know, you got to wait for people to walk by, and this was people were wearing masks. I wanted everybody to have masks, because I think in the future it's going to be more interesting when you look at a picture, because it's only 1 year. We had 20. It feels like 10 years, but it's 1 year, and it's everybody's got mask in this series. There's more to the. This is just a window, but I shot further on back, and you see the bricks and the color, which I.
Maybe just to sort of start to sort of mosey on home, I'll read the two Bacon quotes and then turn to a question about Connecticut, where we are now. These are two quotes that Larry shared with me, and I think they're actually quite apropos for what we're looking at now and what we're talking about. This is Francis Bacon, quote, "For a crowd is not company, and faces are but a gallery of pictures, and talk but a tinkling cymbal, where there is no love." And then this another one, quote, "Whatsoever is delighted in solitude is either a wild beast or a god." Yes.
I love those. He's brilliant.
And sort of this idea of the solitude that we keep coming back to, sort of the solitude even within a crowd as well as communicating that as well. So sort of trying to mosey on towards the end here. Both of you moved to Connecticut, and I was wondering, sort of what influenced your move when you initially moved here, and what does it mean to you now, this community, this place, especially thinking about the,
take it first?
almost 50 years you've been here,
Take
Larry.
it first.
Well, when we first moved to Connecticut, it was like I moved to Mars. I came from New York, raised in a city. Cities was my whole life. And coming out and seeing trees, sky, space, especially a person who uses space in his pictures, there was so much space and air and things silhouetted and nature itself that it really turned me on to do more photography. And I started to shoot, and it's I see it this way because I didn't grow up like this. Maybe if I had grown up in Westport or this area, I wouldn't see the way I see. It would be like when I went to China, I was photographing things that the Chinese people were wondering why I was taking pictures. It's so normal. I mean, what's so different about that? Well, I entered a whole different culture, and it's things that they were doing I never saw before, so I photograph it. And that's the same thing. I went into a totally new environment and saw things that, because when I was told, when I moved up here, and when I spoke to other photographers, they said, you can't take good pictures in Connecticut. You can only take pictures in New York. Well, that's what they were exposed to, and that's what everybody was shooting, New York street scenes. But they didn't see, they really weren't looking what's around them. And I came, and for the first time I looked around, and I said, wow, this place is a wonderful place to do photography. And that's what I started doing. It's 40-some-odd years ago.
Yep. As long as I've been alive. It was destined.
Well,
Adger?
I've been living here for about 11 years. And I moved here originally because my landlord in New York wanted to go to $5,000 a month for it. And so I had to find some place. And I was reading in the art magazine that Bridgeport, Connecticut wanted artists to move up here. They were changing the downtown, and they wanted artists to come up and do it. And so I came up here the first time, and I said, nah, man, I ain't moved to Podunkville. I live in New York. I'm a New Yorker. I was born and bred in New York, man. I'm like, New York, man? No. And then I came up again, and I saw the ocean. I said, well, I grew up in nature. I grew up in Ohio, so I was very close to nature. And I said, that's it, I'm moving. And I moved here in an artist building, and the rent was reasonable, and we have a really nice community of people there. And I think I've found a home here, and people like my work, and I've been doing shows, and I met Larry, and you know, so I love it now. I don't see me going anywhere else anytime soon. I travel a lot anyway, but coming back here to Bridgeport is quiet. I can do my work. I don't have people knocking on my door. I'm not listening to horns and whistles and bells and stuff. And it's a very quieting place for me.
Leslie, maybe, this is very loud. Maybe we could shift to some Q&A.
Okay,
We just have a few minutes left. If anyone would like to ask a question of our curators, of our artists, we ask you to come to the Q&A mics just so the people watching at home can hear your question.
Yeah, you both rejected the idea that history played a great role in the formation of your images, but I have to say, Larry particularly, you joined a community of artists that had been blacklisted, and you were the youngest member, right?
You're talking about the Photo League?
Yeah.
Yeah, they,
So what I was going to say, certainly history played an important role in your formative years as a photographer,
you know,
right?
Thomas, I was sort of like on the fringe. I was 16 years old, 17 years old, when I met these people. And like, there was no politics or anything involved in it. And it was strictly all photography. But ultimately, the Photo League got caught up with the McCarthy investigation. There were some communists and people within that were part of the Photo League. Gene Smith and Ansel Adams went. It appeared in writing that they were, the Photo League was, there were communists in it, and they got blacklisted. And then Smith and Ansel Adams went to Washington to find out why they were blacklisted. They found no proof that they were ever, a communist thing. So, if that's what you say,
I want you to expound a little bit more on your role in that. I mean, I know you had no role as a 16-year-old kid in communism, but what were you thinking as that was happening? And did you leave the organization before it collapsed, or did it collapse and that's why you left it? I mean, talk a little bit more about the very end.
I was in California when it went down, when I was at an art center school. I was a kid. I wasn't cognizant of politics at all. I was going to school. That was my interest, Looking back, I wonder whether the whole thing was trumped up anyhow. I know a few people, Paul Strand, they say was a communist. The FBI actually even put a spy in the organization. There was one of the league people was teaching darkroom and to this young lady, and she was learning darkroom, but she was working and getting salary from the FBI to get to get this guy in trouble. But those are weird days.
So when you came back into your design,
It was gone, yeah, it was gone. They were having financial troubles anyhow. They were going to go down anyhow because all of the bad publicity, a lot of people weren't joining. And so they weren't getting the income, and there was the rent and everything, so.
Hi, I have a question that's either for Adger or Halima. I'm not quite sure which. I really enjoyed the exhibit. It's really beautiful. But there was two pictures that I had questions about. There's Suriname number 4 and Suriname number 7 appeared to be the same photograph, but in slightly different sizes. I couldn't.
There's a duplicate
Yeah.
print.
No, that was deliberate.
So
yeah?
I'm sure it was deliberate, but I wanted to know what was the story behind that one. Okay, that's a Halima.
The story behind doing
Thank
that,
you.
having curated at various university galleries and museums, I'm being cognizant of the way students navigate space is that I, as a signature, always will repeat an image twice to see if they are paying attention and notice it. And so because this was at a university museum, and because the audience was not only the adjacent community, but the immediate community, I thought that it was an important thing to do. And it's that simple. And what it does usually is it opens up a different kind of a conversation about perception, awareness, and seeing.
Hi, my question is for the photographers. When you're asked to do something like this and you have to look back on your own work, I'm curious as to what parts of your work are you most proud of when you look back and you say, you know, I always had it, you know? And what parts are you proud that you've developed over time?
When you see all of your work together in such an exhibition like this, what do you see as, do certain things come to the fore, you know, you're proud of? I know when we were looking through thousands of images, you were stopped on some that you hadn't looked at in decades.
Well, I got it, like I told you, I let you pretty much, because I wanted another point of view. If a photographer puts up a show, he or she picks the same pictures because they like those pictures. And so I wanted to expose a lot of work, and that was happening to me. So I wanted to expose some things that I never exposed before. And so I said, go ahead, you know, and you did. To be honest with you, there are certain pictures in the show that I'm not fond of.
He's told me. I know. But that.
However, and there are certain pictures that I have home that I love. And I say to myself, I love this picture, why isn't it hanging? Instead, I don't have that. However, when I go back and I look at what you've done, you've exposed to me a lot of pictures that I had zero interest in. And all of a sudden, I saw them in a different light. Like the woman that's on the screen now with the hair. I would never have chosen it, but when I see it now, I like it. So that's the thing. You've opened up an area, you know, opened up images. However, I still wish that the pictures that I have at home were up there.
That's the next show, Larry.
Adger, do you want to give us our last words?
I don't know. I don't have that feeling that I'm proud of this or proud of that. I don't think of it like that. There are pictures that I like and pictures that I don't like, because I don't know. I don't like that word. I'm proud of this. Spirit comes and spirit talks, and I do the work. To be proud is like, that's back to the I. Look what I did. And I don't think like that. I think more about, look what came through me, how I felt. I can tell you how I feel, like Icarus with the little figure in the sun. I love that picture. I can't even imagine how it came through me. I know what I felt when I saw it, the feeling, but I don't know. The word proud is, for me.
Well, we appreciate your photographs. We appreciate Leslie and Halima for curating them here at Fairfield. Please join me in giving a great round of applause to our fantastic guests. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. We hope you go.
Thank you for coming.
Thank you, and we hope you can go see both of the exhibitions. They're up through the mid-June.